In September, Russia continued making important advances in several sectors of the battlefield. Ukraine is still struggling to contain the Russian offensive, which has been going on for almost a year. All this is happening while Putin engages in another round of nuclear saber-rattling, and as Zelenskyy is working hard to maintain a pro-Ukrainian bipartisan coalition in the United States on the eve of the crucial presidential elections. A lot has happened regarding the war in Ukraine in September, so make sure to watch this video. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us, we couldn't be doing it without your help. Capturing Pokrovsk continues to appear to be the primary focus of the Russian offensive operations. In September, most of the fighting in this sector took place in the south. Previously, the Russian army made rapid gains, reaching the Radivka-Novoradivka-Selidova line. There were rumblings of an impending collapse of the Ukrainian front in this sector, but in September the situation was stabilized. The Russian army captured Krasny Yar and made some gains in Radivka and Novoradivka along with the M30 highway. But overall, in the central and northern axes of the Pokrovsk sector, the situation has remained largely unchanged. Most of the fighting has been going on in the southern sector. Here, the Russian army has failed to make any meaningful advance westwards, but has significantly expanded their area of control to the south. The purpose of these operations was to widen the salient to the south, in order to minimize the risk of Ukrainian flanking attacks. Another aim may be moving southwards on Kurykova, another tactically important town in Donbass. The Russian army has already been moving on Kurykova from the east, and is currently fighting in Maximilianivka. The southwards movement from the Pokrovsk sector creates a potential threat on Kurykova from the north as well. On this axis, the Russians completed the capture of Krasnohorivka and then moved westwards on Hostre, capturing this village at the end of September. And in the southern axis of the Pokrovsk sector, the Russians advanced too. On September 1st, they captured Mikhailivka and Dolinivka. At this point, there were reports about a potential encirclement of elements of the 59th, 68th, and 117th Brigades, and the 15th Brigade defending the line between Memyk and the River Vovche, which could have been bypassed by the numerically superior Russian forces. But the situation was somewhat stabilized when the 15th Karadag Brigade of the National Guard, the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, and the 12th Special Operations Azov Brigade were deployed in this sector. On September 12th, they stopped the Russian advance west of Mikhailivka at the entrance of Selidova. So the Russians decided to move southwards. On September 9th, they captured Memyk and Halitsynivka. Then they captured Lysivka, Zhelana Persha, Ukrainsk and Zhelana Druha. Earlier we reported the intensification of the Russian offensive efforts in the Vuhledar sector. This time, instead of attacking Ukrainian fortifications head-on, the Russians decided to target the flanks of Vuhledar. In August, the Russian army took control of a portion of the O0532 highway east of Vodanya, effectively cutting one of the supply lines to Vuhledar. In early September, they advanced on Vimka in the northeast and along the river Kaslagach, entering Prechestivka in the west. On September 8th, they captured Vodyana. On September 21st, the Russians crossed the Kaslagach river and advanced some 4 kilometers northwards, creating a significant threat of encirclement of Vuhledar. The fighting has already started inside the city, and it looks like the fate of this battle is sealed. The Russians enjoy a manpower advantage in the Vuhledar sector, with only the CO51134 highway remaining as the supply line for the Ukrainian forces inside the town. Vuhledar is the most important stronghold of the Ukrainian army in this area, and losing it creates an opportunity for the Russian army to attempt a truly mechanized breakthrough through the open fields. Ukraine reportedly lacks significant defensive structures beyond Vuhledar in a flat area with minimal vegetation. But if this war has taught us something, it is that the Russians are not good at mechanized breakthroughs, so instead they may choose to continue employing the tactic of careful but costly infantry attacks. Elsewhere in Donbass, the Ukrainians have largely stood their ground. In the Chasiv Yar sector, the fighting is still largely going on along the Severetsky Donetsk Canal. The only area where the Russian army has been able to establish a permanent foothold beyond the canal is in the south, outside of the town limits. The most notable development in this sector was the completion of the capture of Ryhorivka to the north of Chasiv Yar, but here the Russians are beyond the canal too. A few months ago, Chasiv Yar seemed like the key area of focus of the Russian offensive, but whether due to the shift of focus to the Pokrovsk offensive in order to capitalize on earlier breakthroughs, or due to the inability to cross the canal, or perhaps due to the Ukrainian advantage of controlling the dominant heights in Chasiv Yar, the Russians have not had much success in this area yet. In the Toretsk sector, battles are currently going on inside this city. The Russians are slowly grinding their way inside Toretsk, but urban battles are difficult, so it may take weeks before Russia can claim full control of Toretsk. Outside of Toretsk, the Azov battalion managed to break the encirclement of a pocket of resistance in New York in early September, restoring some of the earlier lost positions. In the Kharkiv Oblast, the front is barely moving. The only meaningful development here was the liberation of the ruins of the aggregate plant in Vovchansk. Earlier, we talked about the encirclement of a Russian unit inside the plant, and on September 24th, the HUR Special Forces liberated it, taking around 20 Russian prisoners in the process. At this point, it looks like the Russian command has deprioritized the Kharkiv front and is focusing their offensive potential on other fronts. The situation on the Kupiansk-Svetova front is quickly deteriorating for the Ukrainians. Remember, during the Ukrainian autumn 2022 counter-offensive, they managed to cross the Oskil River and liberate large swathes of land up to the P66 highway. Since then, the Russians have recaptured the strategic initiative on this front, and they have been constantly attacking here for more than a year. In August, they finally started making serious gains. They have advanced on the line from Sinkivka in the north to Neveska in the south. It is creating a significant threat to the Ukrainian bridgehead on the east of the Oskil River. The Russian movement suggests that they may be targeting the village of Krulakivka. Success here will cut the Ukrainian bridgehead in half, creating problems for their logistics on the Kupiansk-Svetova front. Both sides continue attacking in Kursk Oblast. In early September, the Ukrainians expanded their area of control around the 38K O24 highway, capturing Pogrebki, Marievka and Olovka. But on September 9th, the Russians attempted a counter-offensive on the Kursk front. Elements of the 106th VDV Division and the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade took Olgovka, Snagost, Krasno-Oktябrskoye, Komarovka, Vishnevka, Obukovka, Yakovo, and several other villages after launching an attack from Koronevo. Let us now give you a little context about the Ukrainian actions in the Kursk Oblast so far. After an initial success, the front line had generally stabilized. The most notable action after the first days was the destruction of bridges over the River Seym, making the logistics of the Russian army in the Gluskovo area extremely challenging. So, many expected Ukraine to strike in this area, but the Ukrainians lingered, and it is now clear why. They were expecting the Russians to counterattack to relieve the troops in the Gluskovo area. And on September 11th, the 116th Brigade launched their own attack to move into the rear of the Russian forces in Snagost. The Ukrainians advanced through the border on Veseloya. Another incursion was attempted through Chotkino. Apparently, the lack of coordination between the units prevented the Ukrainians from executing their plan and encircling the Russian grouping in Snagost. Heavy fighting is still going on here and in other parts of the Kursk front. The Ukrainians are still fighting to keep the pressure on Koronevo, and in September they captured Durovka, Zherevli and Kremyanoye, while the Russians are trying to get closer to Sudzha. During this period, they retook Boki from the Ukrainian army. One of the causes of Ukraine's troubles on the battlefield is insufficient manpower, which we have already talked about many times. The head of the Defense Committee of the Ukrainian Parliament, Alexander Zatinevich, has claimed that the impact of the newly mobilized soldiers will be felt in about 3 months. The Financial Times report cites a senior Ukrainian official suggesting that about 30,000 new soldiers per month have been mobilized since May, but the experienced Ukrainian soldiers complain about their battle readiness and morale. Unnamed commanders fighting in Donbass claim that 50 to 70% of the newly recruited infantrymen have been killed or wounded. This may be an exaggeration, but the decision of the Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi to extend the basic training for the mobilized from 3 months to longer is an indirect acknowledgement of the lack of preparedness of new soldiers. But the Kremlin is also grappling with a potentially difficult issue of further mobilization. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Minister of Defense is pushing Putin for another round of mobilization, but the latter has been trying to avoid mobilization, instead relying on the recruitment of contract soldiers. Even though the Russian army is making gains in Ukraine, they need more soldiers to maintain their current pace of attack, considering all the losses they have been experiencing. Along with working to overpower the enemy on the ground, the sides continued to engage in asymmetric warfare to damage the enemy's capacity and resolve to fight on. This is mostly conducted via long-range strikes on military and civilian infrastructure. On September 3rd, the Russians launched 2 Iskander missiles on the Poltava Military Communications Institute, killing dozens of Ukrainian soldiers, along with conducting regular Shahed drone attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure throughout September. According to Forbes, Russia is producing 500 Shahed drones, 90 to 115 cruise missiles, and 56 ballistic missiles per month. The domestic production and the delivery of ballistic missiles from North Korea and Iran has allowed Russia to keep up with the regular pace of strikes on Ukraine, which the country's air defense is simply incapable of dealing with. Ukraine lacks a significant number of air defense systems to shoot down all the drones and missiles launched on it. The last reported delivery from Iran was 200 to 220 FATH 360 ballistic missiles, with a range of 110 to 120 kilometers. Meanwhile, Ukraine made its perhaps most consequential long-range strike on Russia during this period. On September 18th, drones, or according to some speculations, the newly produced Palyanytsia drones/missiles, were launched on the 107th Rocket Artillery Depot near Toropets. The Russians reportedly stored up to 30,000 tons of Iskander and Tochka-U missiles, KAB glide bombs, Grad rockets, and other assets there. This is impossible to verify, but Estonian intelligence claimed that Russia had lost 2 to 3 months' worth of ammunition in this strike. Ukrainian drones destroyed 2 other ammunition depots on September 20th in Tikhoretsk and Oktyabrsky. Remember, Ukraine is conducting these attacks with domestically produced weapons. The United States still does not permit the use of its long-range missiles on Russian soil. The Biden administration believes that such permission will lead to an escalation with Russia without providing much advantage to Ukraine. Putin understands this sentiment and is making sure that the Americans do not change their stance. In September, he stated that the permission to use American and Western long-range weapons on Russian soil would mean that the United States, NATO, and the European countries are in a direct war with Russia, which is going to change the nature of the conflict, and if that is the case, we will take appropriate measures. He then went on to talk about the necessity to alter the Russian nuclear doctrine, just in case anyone forgot that Russia had nuclear weapons. Russia using nuclear weapons is still extremely unlikely, but there are presumably other ways Russia can escalate and cause trouble to the West. Military analyst Michael Kaufman speculates that Russia can give anti-ship missiles to the Houthis in Yemen, which would expand their capacity to further damage maritime shipping. It is very curious that, according to Reuters, Russia may intend to do exactly that. Iran has reportedly brokered secret negotiations between the Kremlin and the Houthis regarding the delivery of the Russian P-800 Onyx anti-ship cruise missiles. Iran remains the chief military ally of Russia at the moment, but both Ukrainian and Western government sources raised the alarm regarding increased support by China to Russia. On September 10th, the US Deputy Secretary of State Campbell told Politico that China is sending resources vital for domestic military production in exchange for military technology. Then, on September 13th, Reuters cited European intelligence sources and leaked documents claiming that Russia has been producing Gambar A1 attack drones, which have Chinese engines. According to Reuters, Russia has produced more than 2,500 Gambar A1 drones, which have a range of 1,500 kilometers between July 2023 and July 2024. The Russians are also reportedly testing Gambar 3 attack drones with a range of 2,000 kilometers, which also has Chinese parts. A Ukrainian official, Vladislav Lazuk, claimed on September 23rd that China provides almost 60% of all foreign components found in weapons used by Russia in Ukraine. Beijing is denying these allegations and is still positioning itself as a neutral party in this war, but it is more than clear that they are helping Russia at this point. Putin claimed in September that Russia will produce 1.4 million drones in 2024, and perhaps the aforementioned drones are among them. Meanwhile, despite delays and criticism by Ukraine, its Western allies continue making military aid pledges and deliveries. The German Chancellor Scholz announced that they will deliver 17 Iris-T air defense systems to Ukraine by 2026. Then the German Defense Minister Pistorius announced a €150 million military aid package, which included 12 Panzerhaubitze 2000 self-propelled howitzers. 6 of them will be delivered in 2024. Another important pledge is 77 Leopard 1A5 tanks, which will be delivered as soon as possible. Berlin has also reportedly delivered 60,000 155mm artillery shells, 5 Bandwagen 206 vehicles, 2 TRML-4D air defense radars, machine guns, and small arms ammunition. Lastly, on September 25th, Germany announced €70 million of aid to support the Ukrainian energy infrastructure in the winter. Along with that, the German Bundestag reported a €400 million increase of military aid to Ukraine. Germany continues sending crucial military aid to Ukraine, strongly entrenching itself as the second biggest donor of the Ukrainian army. And the largest donor, the United States, has made several important pledges too, despite strong domestic opposition. On September 6th, the Pentagon announced a $250 million aid package consisting of RIM-7 anti-aircraft missile systems, Stinger missiles, 105 and 155mm artillery shells, TOW missiles, Bradley and M113 vehicles, and HIMARS ammunition. On September 11th, the State Secretary Blinken announced a $700 million aid package, which includes additional air defense systems. On September 25th, the Pentagon made another pledge of $375 million, with more artillery shells, HIMARS ammunition, Javelin and AT-4 anti-tank guns, M1117 armored vehicles, MRAP vehicles, and other tools among the highlights. Finally, President Biden announced additional funding of $8 billion for Ukraine, along with an expanded training program for F-16 fighter jets. Other allies have also made notable pledges. Romania delivered the earlier promised Patriot system. On September 6th, during the Ramstein meeting, Britain pledged 650 lightweight multi-role missiles to be delivered by the end of 2024. Canada promised CRV-7 rocket motors, 1,300 unspecified warheads, hundreds of machine guns and small arms, along with dozens of decommissioned armoured personnel carriers, which can be used for spare parts. The Netherlands announced €80 million worth of equipment and air-to-air missiles for F-16s. On September 9th, Sweden pledged $443 million worth of ammunition, patrol boats, missiles, and money to facilitate a transfer of Gripen fighter jets in the future. On September 11th, Britain pledged more than £600 million of military aid to Ukraine, which included air defense missiles, shells and ammunition, and armored vehicles. On the same day, Croatia announced a $200 million aid package, while Latvia promised to give 0.25% of its GDP to Ukraine in 2025. On September 16th, the Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski announced that Poland was going to join the Czech initiative of artillery shells procurement for Ukraine. They're planning to allocate €50 million this year and €50 million next year to support this initiative. Speaking of the Czech initiative, the media cites Indian and European officials claiming that India has been the mysterious provider of shells to Ukraine. They have been selling empty shells to Italy and Czechia, which filled them with explosives and then transferred them to Ukraine. India has always acted neutral in this war. They have been buying Russian oil for a good price, indirectly helping the Kremlin to fund its war in Ukraine. And then, apparently, they have been selling shells indirectly to Ukraine. For countries like India, who do not have a vested interest in a faraway war, such wars create an opportunity to profit and potentially boost their military exports. On September 20th, the European Commission President von der Leyen announced 2 loan packages worth €80 billion for Ukraine. The money will be spent on the purchase of domestically produced weapons and to support Ukraine's embattled energy infrastructure. Earlier, Ukraine's Defense Minister Umerov claimed that Ukraine will be able to produce $20 billion worth of weapons if it gets funding. Ukraine has been actively manufacturing drones, armored vehicles, and other military assets. Most recently, the then Minister of Military Industry, Kamyshin, claimed that Ukraine has started producing crucial 155mm artillery shells. Lastly, a quick note about a report from the Australian media. The Sydney Morning Herald has reported that the Australian government is seeking the US's permission to transfer 59 mothballed A1A1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Apparently, the US government has not authorized this transfer and does not appear keen to do so. Very strange to say the least. A perceived threat of escalation cannot explain this, since the Americans have already sent a meager number of 31 of the same tanks. Perhaps the United States wants to avoid any bad press for its weapons and military vehicles. Footage of destroyed American tanks may be bad for business. But when you're fighting a war, your tanks fight, your tanks destroy, and get destroyed. There is no way to avoid this. And Ukraine can surely use a few dozen old yet operational tanks. Simultaneously, Ukraine is working hard on the diplomatic front to strengthen its position. The second round of the Ukraine-organized peace summit is scheduled to take place in November. There have been calls by Ukraine's allies to invite Russia to the summit, including by the German Chancellor Scholz in September. On September 13th, Zelenskyy confirmed that Russia will in fact be invited to the Second Peace Summit, but statements of several Russian officials indicate that they are not interested in participating. Keeping the United States on board remains the crucial part of Ukraine's defense strategy. Losing the military support of the United States would make it next to impossible for the Ukrainian army to sustain its defense of the country. Thus, Zelenskyy traveled to the United States to meet with President Biden and the Republican nominee Donald Trump to ensure the continuation of American support, along with pitching his victory plan. Zelenskyy's victory plan has not been made public, but according to the media reports and Zelenskyy's interviews, it includes guaranteeing Ukraine's membership in NATO. So far, Western leaders have said all the nice things about Ukraine's accession, but no ironclad guarantees have been offered yet. It remains unlikely for Ukraine to be admitted to NATO while they are at war with Russia. The last thing Western leaders want is to get involved into a war directly with Russia, and they fear that Ukraine's membership would mean exactly that. The second component of the victory plan is permission to use Western-made long-range missiles in Russia. Again, so far the United States has been reluctant to give this permission, at least publicly. There are rumors that the West is actually ready to give this permission, but does not want to talk about it openly, in order to ensure some degree of ambiguity on this matter. The third element is the continued military and economic support to Ukraine. Here too, the Western leaders are all saying the right things about supporting Ukraine, as long as it takes. However, there has been a great degree of criticism of delays and timidness regarding the Western policy of providing military aid to Ukraine, particularly the American policy. Kyiv has to work extremely hard to persuade its allies to send every new category of weapons. It took months before the US agreed to send HIMARS. It took more than a year for the West to finally agree to send a few dozen tanks. The same is true for long-range missiles and F-16s. So, even though Western military aid has allowed the Ukrainian army to keep on fighting, it is not entirely clear how much longer the West is going to give weapons to Ukraine. Finally, EU membership. This seems like the most realistic goal of Ukraine's victory plan, as things stand right now. Ukraine became a candidate member in June 2022, and barring any extraordinary developments, it will become an EU member in the foreseeable future. Apparently, the Biden administration was not overly impressed by the victory plan and demanded that Ukraine give them a realistic picture of their goals in this war. Relations with Trump are even more complicated. Military aid to Ukraine has been a source of criticism by MAGA for months. In his campaign speech during Zelenskyy's visit, Trump mocked Zelenskyy's requests for more military support and stated that the United States will leave the war in Ukraine once he becomes president. He has also been very confident in stating that he will be able to broker a deal between Zelenskyy and Putin without actually elaborating on what this deal may look like. Trump later met with Zelenskyy and expressed his respect for the Ukrainian president. Still, at this point, it is difficult to expect him to be more supportive of Ukraine than the Biden administration if Trump wins the election. So, although we are seeing more diplomatic effort in recent months, there is little indication that the war will end soon. Ukraine and Russia are still very far apart in their vision of a fair deal, but fatigue is becoming a major factor for both sides. Even the Russian public, which seemed supportive or indifferent towards the war, may be changing its attitude. A recent poll demonstrated that 63% of Russians are in favor of signing a peace deal by making mutual concessions. But there is no indication that the most important person in Russia, Putin, is intending to do that. To conclude, let's look at the visually documented equipment losses suffered by both sides in the war, according to the Oryx blog. As of September 30th, Russia has lost at least 3,424 tanks, 7,662 vehicles, 290 command posts and communication stations, 1,374 artillery systems and vehicles, 422 multiple rocket launchers, 128 aircraft, and 145 helicopters. Ukraine has lost at least 944 tanks, 3,026 vehicles, 23 command posts and communication stations, 654 artillery systems and vehicles, 78 multiple rocket launchers, 100 aircraft, and 49 helicopters. Further updates on the war in Ukraine are on the way. To make sure you don't miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.